Hi guys, so today's video is going to be part 3 of the Rhythm of War spoilery chats. I will have parts 1 and 2 linked down below, and as always, I am only going to be talking about the interludes all the way through the end of this part. I will not be talking about spoilers that have to do with the Cosmere, and because I have read the entire book, when I am mentioning possible theories that I have or things like that, it's specifically about those things that I had in those moments, things I noticed in those moments. I will have the calendar for when parts 4 and 5 are going up. I am going to be going through these rapid fire. So starting with the first interlude, here we see everybody's favorite Stormlight Archive character, Moash/Vire. And really quick, I'm just gonna kind of poke fun at the fact that there are so many characters in the Stormlight Archive. Why do some of them have to get name changes? Anyway, it's not because I dislike Moash, but genuinely this chapter to me almost felt like mustache twirling villain type of chapter because he is so single-minded. Like the Pursuer, I don't know why, but I'm down with it. Because that's his thing. The Pursuer's like, I kill whoever kills me. And for some reason, I don't know, it's so primal that it's funny and awesome. But Moash is just like, I must get that Kaladin before I can be, I don't know. Maybe I do just hate Moash. I just hate Moash. What I do like about this chapter, though, is it's very ominous. So you're getting Moash being a crazy person, but at the same time, you're like, something's gonna come of this. You just feel it. I am very curious. I know there are some people out there that, after Oathbringer, still were hoping for a Moash redemption arc. And I'm wondering if you were one of those people. Interlude number 5, which would be the second one for this part, I don't like Lift. I feel so alone in not liking Lift in this fandom, but it's just so annoying. And I like Wendell. I like her spren. I did think it was sad, though, that the reason she doesn't want to grow up is because she wants to keep being her mother's little girl. That was sad. And then Interlude 6, Taravangian. I said this in one of the previous ones, but he makes me sad. He makes me sad when he's all emotional and he wants to have company. I don't know. I do like him scheming, though, even in his stupid state where he's like, maybe I can do something, which is pretty cool. And I feel like even though he's so terrible with his actions, his intentions, that's why I love him as a villain. Because you're like, I wouldn't do it, but I get why you're doing what you're doing. I really like the last line of that interlude. Taravangian had decided not to give up. It's simple, it's not like it's gorgeous or anything, but I thought it was cool. Chapter 44 is one of my favorite chapters in the entire book. I mentioned it in my non-spoiler review, how there's the hallway scene, which is just filled with so much tension. This was the chapter I was referring to. I just felt like the tension was tangible. I don't know. It's like it came over me like I was there with Kaladin. It was so well written. And I didn't mention in the previous part the action scene with Adolin and Shadesmar, and that wasn't intentional. That action scene wasn't that notable to me, not because it was poorly written, but because I didn't really have a lot of fear in that moment for Adolin or any of our other characters, but I had genuine fear in this moment. I was afraid that they were going to get Kaladin, or I was afraid that he would have to put Teft down and then run off, and then they would find Teft, or I didn't know what was going to happen. I thought this entire scene was amazing. Chapter 45, we get our first backstory chapter. 584 pages, at least in the arc, before we get a backstory chapter, which I'm actually grateful for. You're going to recognize, I've always said that I'm a very character-driven reader, and you're going to see that every single time that we get this backstory stuff. The thing that stands out to me is Jaxlim, if that's how you say it. Their mom, it just makes me so sad, because in this particular part, you see that their mother, she was so sharp, and you know where she ends up, and it just made me sad to see her where she was. I loved chapter 46. I liked getting more of Rabanyel, and I think Rabanyel and Navani are such a fascinating pairing. They are, for me, like the female version of Dalinar and Taravangian, basically. There's just something, they're very scholarly, which is very fitting for Roshar, and I really love that despite being on opposing sides, they both sort of kind of get along, and it reminds me, there's a duo in the third Mistborn book, and I don't want to say who one of the characters is because I don't want to spoil who is or isn't alive. And I'm really sorry because I know not everyone has read Mistborn. But there is a villainous character, if you will, a very minor character. But they're on opposing sides from one of the other characters, yet they love to debate like scholarly philosophies, things like that. And Navani and Rabanyul, I just think it's so well done. Their dynamic is fantastic. I also love having Navani pulled away from pretty much all of our other main characters. I think she stands out on her own. So I said in the past that I felt lukewarm about Navani in previous books, and then at the beginning of this book, I honestly did not. I was joking about the like, she was the gold digger thing, but I truly was kind of like, I didn't like Navani after Oathbringer because of how she was in the past toward Evie. My heart just broke so much for Evie. So I was like, Navani, you should have been nice to her. She was all alone. I have never had that strong of positive feelings for Navani, but I am loving Navani here. I love her in isolation. That sounds really dark, but I just mean, I think we finally get to know Navani a little better. And, I kind of get why Dalinar is so entranced by her. We get some more of Kaladin and Teft in this chapter as well. I had so much fear for Teft. I will tell you what my fear was in this moment, during this part, what I was thinking was going to happen in this book. I was so afraid that Kaladin at some point in the book would save the day and all the Radiants would get their powers back, but it would be too late and he'd come back and be all excited and be able to see Teft and Teft would have his powers. I thought all of that was going to happen, but then it would turn out like Teft died. Like his coma lasted too long. I was so scared for Teft. Also, I find that this book reminds me a little bit in some ways of Way of Kings, especially in Kaladin's plotline, because it feels like there's no way that our hero could possibly get out of this. And that feeling was so strong in Way of Kings with Kaladin as a slave. He had so little advantage against his circumstances, and that's how I felt with this, but he has opposition that is so much stronger in this as well. There was a fear of death, of course, with running the bridges, but this one you have people literally after Kaladin. I just feel like the stakes are incredible. And then in the next chapter, chapter 47, this chapter, it was interesting because it was exciting, except for there wasn't tons and tons of prep, but I really liked Cord shooting Nail in the face. I thought that was awesome, and also it was a nice shout out to Dawn Shard, because they're like, for some reason, she seemed really determined to be on the battlefield, and I was like, I know why. Also, once again, poking fun at the fact, why does everybody in fantasy books have to have so many names? Because it says Naelin, called Nail, and I'm like, just have his name be one of them. Just have it be one of them, and I'll remember that one. Also, Naelin, called Nail, doing work was kind of awesome, but I am really curious, because there's that part where Szeth goes to pull out the sword, and it's like, but he hesitated, and I'm kind of like, what if he had used that sword on him, though? What would have happened? Also, this chapter for me sets up big time a what the heck are Dalinar's powers even sort of feeling. Chapter 48, honestly, the whole thing makes me sad, because you're seeing Gavilar's interest in these people who are just like, oh look, humans, and then they're all nice and hospitable, and there's this dark feeling coming around, and it's like, man, it's like reading textbooks of them being like, the natives here, they're so naive, they will be very easy to conquer. Like, that's the vibe I get from this chapter. It makes me sad. In chapter 49, I feel like we see this reflected in the sibling when they say, I hate humans. Humans twist what is said and always make themselves out to be right. Also, on the next page, there's a part that I found very interesting when the sibling says, thousands of years ago, something happened that changed singers. It hurt me too. Navani says, you're speaking of the binding of the unmade, which made the singers lose their forms. Yes, that terrible act touched the souls of all who belonged to Roshar, Spren too. How have no Spren mentioned this? I don't know, but I lost the rhythm of my light that day. The tower stopped working. My father, Honor, should have been able to help me, but he was losing his mind. And he soon died. that just, I don't know. I found that part very interesting. Also, I absolutely love the dynamic between Kaladin and Navani. I think that the characters themselves are so well fleshed out, and I think that the character dynamics with a lot of the villains is really fascinating, and it's so fun to see it unfold. But there's something for me in the characters, the main characters interacting with each other thus far in the series. It's not that I've been disappointed, but I just loved the Kaladin and Shallan interaction in the chasms. I loved the camaraderie of Bridge 4 and Book 1, but then I felt like we didn't get as much of those sorts of scenes in Book 3 for my personal taste. And I just feel like this interaction between Kaladin and Navani, it's not anything grand or epic, but I just really like them working together. I never thought I needed a Kaladin-Navani pairing. I also thought it was kind of adorable when Kaladin says, "Yes, sir," and then he's like, brightness. Just kind of a compliment to Navani's ability to do the manly arts of their world. And we have chapter 50, and at first I was like, this chapter's fine. But then Wit shows up, and I'm like, yes, I love Wit. And I tabbed it, the part where Dalinar says, "I would rather a complete victory than anything that allows Odium to hedge his bets." And then Wit, pretends to be writing on his hand, and he's like, delightful. I'll just make a note that you'd like to win. Yes, how foolish of me to not realize that, Blackthorn. Total victory over a god who is currently holding your homeland and recently gained the allegiance of one of your strongest militaries on the planet. Shall I also have him bake you something sweet as an apology for this whole end of the world mess?" I know so many people love Wit, but now I really want to know, does anyone hate him? Does anyone totally hate Wit? Because that will be baffling, but also you can safely say it. I won't judge you. Also, leave it to this chapter, the one that I started, and I'm like, this one's probably gonna be a little boring, to have it go in such a different direction when Yasna stabs that guy in the throat. I tabbed it. These darker tabs are moments I found awesome, which I ended up running out of and then had to use bright pink tabs. But anyway, yeah, that moment. Yasna is awesome. I loved that scene. But then I was kind of annoyed at Dalinar because I thought it was pretty smart, She demonstrates her authority. She shows how stupid this tradition is. She had a whole plan. Now she has a thing where it's like, okay, yeah, this practice is going to be over because it's dumb. And then Dalinar has this little thought where it says, "Yet at the same time, it displayed that Yasna Kholin, brilliant, determined, was not perfect. There were things about her that unnerved even the callous soldier that lived deep inside him." I'm like, dude, you burned a whole city to the ground. She had Renarin ready. The guys healed up. It was fine. And I just like the holier than thou part of Dalinar sometimes. And he kind of was that way too. I mean, that's part of the thing with him and Adolin, right? Is that he kind of has this I'm just always so wise and I always know what's best. And it's like, no, you don't. You're often clueless, man. But you just believe so strongly in yourself. So, anyway. Yasna's cool. And also Renarin is so sweet when he's like, "Dad, I'm sorry, I didn't know that you didn't know." Renarin's the cutest. I'm going to kind of combine chapter 51 and 52 because 51 kind of leads up into 52. Once again, like I said, it's probably boring, but the thing that sticks out to me when their mother is starting to show signs of forgetting, it's so sad. It's sad to see this happening to her, and I'm like, man, do we need the flashbacks to see this? Because it's sad. The flashbacks are always so sad. But something that did make me chuckle is after that part when it says, "It didn't take long for Venli to find the humans tedious." And then we have this whole mysterious conversation with this lady, Axendwith, or whatever her name is, with the rings, which is clearly a shout out in some fashion to a magic system from Mistborn. Ugh, the tie-ins are they're getting so crazy. In chapter 53, I'm very curious, why do you think that Rabaniel is so curious? Or when you were at this point, why do you think that they didn't just order all of the Radiants killed? Why do you think they kept them alive, but in their weird coma state? Also, from part 1, I had mentioned that I really liked this sense of an honor code between Kaladin and Leshwi when they were fighting, and then you see it here again where Leshwi is talking about how she really admires that she's finally found somebody who is a challenge for her, which I think is really cool. But then they also say, "And his friend, I hear she is ancient, ... But never mind that. And we keep getting all these references to Syl being special. She's ancient. She's really popular in Shadesmar. She's famous. We keep getting these little snippets. But then we don't dive that far into it. And I want to know what's going on. Why is Syl just so different from all the other Spren? In chapter 54, I feel so bad for Gavinor, poor little kid. Also, I love the shout out to the stew tradition for Bridge 4, and now that has extended to a bunch of other people. And when Dalinar comes, first off, he sees Renarin in his Bridge 4 uniform, which once again, Renarin's so precious. And then Dalinar having some of the stew and then them applauding was so cute to me. I also really loved this quote when Dalinar is talking to Renarin, and it says, "Don't forget, when you were broken on the floor, consumed by your past, this boy held you. Don't forget who was strong when you, the Blackthorn, were weak." In general, I loved the whole interaction between Renarin and Dalinar. I thought it was really interesting when you see how Renarin rationalizes what happened to Evie, and he sees it as Odium took her because Odium's influence on his father, and he just can't really believe that it was his dad that did it. And it's interesting to see how he has come to terms with it in his mind, or at least to the best of his abilities, versus how Adolin kind of just angrily is like, about the whole thing. I think it's kind of interesting. It definitely shows the differences between the two brothers. But yeah, anyway, this whole conversation between him and Dalinar, so much foreshadowing in the last line of this stupid chapter. I forgot that this line, and then looking back, I'm like, this is such a big deal when they're talking about this like other kind of Spren, and it says, "We need more," Gliss said. "We need more like us. Who will be? Who?" And then Renarin, it says, "I can think of one who would be a perfect choice." And I'm like, who though? I really want to know, who do you think Renarin is referring to? Is it really obvious? Am I just a dum-dum? I don't know who he's thinking of. Man, this whole part is so good. There's 2 chapters that I was like, it's fine. And one of them we already talked about, the one that I tied into the next chapter, and then there's one more chapter that I was like, But this part, otherwise, I feel like everything I have to say is like, oh my gosh, I loved this. So I'm sorry if the cheerfulness is annoying. But I loved chapter 55 when Kaladin and Syl are talking about how you think of grief and loss. And I really liked this one part when Kaladin is talking about Tien. He says, "Sounds like how I used to feel when I remembered Tien was dead. I'd get used to living life as normal, feeling good, only to be reminded by seeing a rock in the rain or by seeing a wooden carving like the ones he used to do. Then my whole day would come crashing down." That's very accurate. That's very, very accurate. And then David came, which was so great. And I like that he did the Bridge 4 thing, but also when they talk about tapping their wrists together, does anyone else see that thing from Friends that Ross and Monica do? I'm sure it's much cooler than that, but every time they say they tap their wrists together, I'm sure it's something like way cooler, but I just always see that. Chapter 56, I was so excited because when they say another listener, I got so pumped. I was like, oh, Verlaine? Chapter 57, we see another flashback, and I really liked seeing Dalinar in this flashback. In chapter 58, we're back with Kaladin, and there's a part when he's kind of like on the run, and he needs Syl to distract some people, and I just like how she went about it. Come on, no, all of you, come see this right now. I'm really annoyed, can't you tell? Chapter 59 was definitely a really great fight scene, but I like how he basically just got the guy stuck in the wall. In chapter 60, I know they're like, look, we caught Lift, and I get that that's probably the bigger deal. But I was very intrigued because Rabaniel is given this gift. Well, it's not the real gift. They make that clear. It's not the real gift. Lift is the real gift. But the thing before the real gift, it says, he stepped forward and respectfully handed her a large pouch. Rabaniel took it, and it made a soft clink. Rabaniel undid the top and stared inside. She sat there for a long moment, and when she next spoke, her voice was devoid of rhythms. How? Where did you get this? I want to know. In that moment, I was like, what the heck was there? In chapter 61, we get more Kaladin and Navani interacting. I loved it. I thought it was great. But the part that stood out a lot to me in this chapter was when Navani sees the sword and she's talking to Rabaniel and says, this is true, but if you want my cooperation and goodwill, perhaps you shouldn't flaunt in front of me the blade taken from the corpse of my son. And then Rabaniel stiffened. She glanced at the warform with the weapon. I did not know. I almost want for Rabaniel to be less awesome because I'm like, okay, well, I want to root for the good guys, which kind of means that you need to get out of here, but I like you. In chapter 62, once again, It's the Jack Slim thing that gets me. And when you really see, she's not just forgetting the songs now. When she says, yes, I'm your mother. You are Eshonai. Can you tell me how I arrived here, Eshonai? I don't seem to remember. Chapter 63, we get another fantastic Kaladin and Syl interaction. I feel like I could basically just read the whole page off to you. I'm not going to do that. I'll stick to one part. But the part where Kaladin says, when I'm at my worst, I feel like I can't change, like I've never changed, that I've always felt this way and always will. When you get like that, Syl said, let me know, all right? Maybe it will help to talk to me about it. Yeah, all right. And Cal, she said, do the same for me. When Kaladin's trying to use the device in this chapter, and he's hurting himself, and Syl says, I think you're going to look extremely silly using it. I can't wait. Chapter 64 is more of Yasna just being awesome, and then we get Wit being sneaky Wit that he's always being, and I'm very curious if you want to speculate who a Theta-Kar is. Put spoilers and then speculate away, because there are some theories. And then also the sleepless part is a reference to Dawn Shard, so if you haven't read Dawn Shard, that will explain it. Chapter 65, the biggest thing for me was Rabanyul with her daughter. Once again, why, Sanderson? Why are you making me like this villain so much? In chapter 66, I pretty much love anytime Taravangian and Dalinar are having any kind of a conversation, but I loved when Taravangian said to Dalinar, still standing on your high tower, Dalinar, proud of how far you can see, when you won't look past your own feet? Yes, you're very noble. How wonderful you are, fighting until the end, dragging every human to death with you. They can all die, knowing you never compromised. Chapter 67 is fine. Venli's discovering her powers. I do like Tamber, though. I think it's really clever the way that Sanderson has written Venli's Spren. Chapter 68 is fine. One downside for me with these backstories is with every other character's backstories, you kind of know how things turn out, obviously, because you're following the characters in present day. But you don't really know their pasts. So when you get these details, it's really heartbreaking. Whereas I feel like in this one, you kind of already know to an extent. I guess you know more, it feels like, about why they went the direction they did. So I feel like it doesn't pack as big of a punch. Chapter 69, we're getting into Stormlight Archive science and magic and discovery. I'm very curious if you found all of that fascinating or if you were bored with these parts. Also, I just want to compliment the pacing again of this book, like I did so much in my non-spoiler review, because this particular section, it's the whole middle chunk of the book. It has the potential to really drag here, but I feel like I've been on the tips of my toes for this whole section. Even though there's not necessarily a ton of action happening, I was just always really invested, and even when a couple of times you have something on the less interesting side or something more fantastically dense like the previous chapter, it's always followed by freaking chapters like chapter 70, where it has one of the best action scenes. Oh my gosh. Well, first off, David speaking. Did anybody else have like a moment when that happened? Also, once again, we get a really cool Leshwi moment, and I love this quote from Leshwi where it says, "And did your leader not conquer his way to the throne? This is the way of your people, as well as mine. Besides, you must admit my people governed better. The humans under our control have not been treated unfairly. Certainly, they live better than the singers fared under your domination." This whole chapter, though, oh my gosh, I felt like I was running out of breath reading about this whole part with the well. And also, I just want to add, there's some fantastic things that Sanderson put in that do such a good job of showing Kaladin's character within the middle of a really intense scene. He's building character even in these moments. So when Kaladin is underwater and it says, Kaladin took a deep breath and dove beneath the black water, feeling it surround him. His panic returned. He didn't know which way was up and which was down. How could you forget which way the sky was? Such a good little thing, little flavor for Kaladin right there. And then he does it again on the next page. It says, he disengaged the fabrial and dropped into the water. The cold shocked him awake. He was able to use the fabrial to tug himself to the side of the reservoir. He crawled out onto dry stone. Amusingly, he was enough a surgeon to worry about how he'd contaminated the drinking water. Of all the things to think about right now. Which is, once again, like, what a fantastic, in the middle of something so tense, to have this moment that, like, brings you back to the character and who is experiencing this thing. That whole part, chapter 70, all of chapter 70, is just so good. One of my favorite chapters in the whole book. I'm going to combine some of my comments about chapters 71 and 72 because they are the conclusions to this part. So I really liked that we end this whole part with essentially our heroes failing again, because part 2 ended with your Theru being taken and you're like, oh no. And then part 3 ends with even higher stakes. What is going on with Kaladin? The tower is even more lost essentially at this point. But one thing from my personal taste is that with Dalinar's chapter, it felt, one, a tiny bit convenient. The timing of it was so perfect, and I just felt like it kind of alleviated my fear for Kaladin, which I actually didn't really want. I would have loved to have ended this section being like, oh, what happened to Kaladin? And then having had no idea, where instead we're kind of like, don't worry, buddy, he's okay. Dalinar picked him up with the storm. It's not a big deal by any means, but I would have really liked this part ending with that lack of knowledge. I think that would have been even more of a page turner, although it would have been weird to start one of the next parts with Dalinar, then having that happen. So I understand for pacing reasons that it probably couldn't have happened later. Anyway, part 3. See, I was about to say it's probably one of my favorites in the whole book, but the whole freaking book, it's all so good because part 1 is fantastic and part 2 is a little more prep, but it's still very interesting, and the mental health in part 2 is so fantastic, and the taking of your theory, and then this part, and then it has some of my favorite chapters in this part. So up through this point, we are very far into the book at this point, over 800 pages. So which part has been your favorite, if you can pick one? And if you haven't continued on and you haven't read the rest of the book and you truly are only through part 3, what are your predictions for the next few parts? Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.